Hi, I thought I would do this video to make up for the lack of a video for this past Monday night due to some kind of technical issue with that recording. I don't know what that issue was. We began our class with just some housekeeping issues. One, dealing with your posts, particularly those when you're responding to the posts of other people. Make sure that your response is somewhat substantive, in that you're not just saying, I agree with your post and you did a good job. If you agree with it, you need to specify what were the issues with which you agreed, and if you disagreed with it, you need to specify like what were some of the issues with which you disagreed with what they said. The second little issue that we touched on under the housekeeping details was grammar. You know, you're a professional, so you need to be making sure that the things that you write and the way that you speak in front of students is professionally correct. This is probably one of the best classes, if not the best class I've had in terms of the written work that's turned in terms of the use of grammar correctly. We still have a few people who are struggling a little bit with getting some things exactly done professionally. We do have a writing center here at the university. If you're having problems with that, make sure you contact them and get some help with some of your writing skills. Another area that we talked on was the use of APA. As I said in the syllabus, everything should be done with APA format. However, when you're posting, you do not need to do a title page and those kinds of things within that APA format. All other assignments should use the APA format, making sure that if you use outside sources or in your written responses, that you are also doing the appropriate citation at the end. As once again, the use of the APA is for all assignments except the postings to the forum. Then we switched gears a little bit and went into Chapter 3, talking about planning and the importance of planning for teachers. You know, if you don't plan, you plan to fail. That's that old saying, and it's so true with teaching. As you get into teaching, you'll realize that if you don't know where you're going, it's really hard to get there. So there needs to be an emphasis on planning for both for the year. You know, what are the things that you're trying to accomplish with your students during that year? And then within that year's plan, you need to break it down into units. And then with each unit, you need to have lesson plans, daily lesson plans that help you reach and help the kids reach the goals that you have for the whole year and for the unit. We talked about the difference between goals and objectives. A goal is a long-term, broad concept. An objective is a way to help you reach that goal. It's an incremental process of the things that you would have students do in order to master that particular goal. We talked about the necessity to use Bloom's taxonomy as you are writing objectives. I called attention to the fact that page 145 in your textbook has a breakdown of Bloom's taxonomy. Bloom started the taxonomy with knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. Some of his students have changed the terminology to more verbs, remembering, comprehending, or understanding, and then applying, analyzing, and then they reversed. They did the synthesis or creating, and then the evaluation. So, no, excuse me, I got it backwards. They did it, the evaluation, and then the creating. As you can see here, the old form, knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, and synthesis and evaluation. You see the change in the new outline from synthesis and evaluation to evaluating first and then creating. So it's just a difference in terminology. But as you're writing objectives, I like for you to use the format of the student will. The student will followed by a verb, hopefully one of those verbs from the Bloom's taxonomy list. Be very careful that you don't use the word understand, because understand is a nebulous term, and it would be very hard to think about how you would assess understanding. You can assess defining a word, you can assess designing something, you can assess comparing, but you can't assess the understanding that a student might have. As we are thinking about developing objectives, now there's another format for objectives that some people have used, and these are called RPM objectives. Your objectives should be rigorous, using the higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy. It should be purposeful. Why are we doing this? We are learning, the student will define or spell, let's do the student will spell correctly 10 words from the vocabulary list. That's quite easy to assess, but then if you want to make it purposeful in order to better comprehend the story that we're reading in class, and then it should be measurable. If he has to spell 10 words, the measure of that, the assessment of that is, did the student spell 10 words correctly? And some examples here of what some of those might be. Now, there are other ways that people sometimes use to talk about how to write that first part of that objective. My favorite is the student will. Some people say the student will be able to, it's TSWBAT. But make it simple, the student will. Always make sure then that when you are thinking about objectives, you're also thinking about assessing that objective. Sometimes it's called backward design, because we begin with that objective. This is what I want them to learn. This is my lesson. This is my lesson for today. What do I want them to get out of this lesson today? That's your objective. The student will do what today? Make sure it's that action verb, what they will do. And then how are you going to know that students have obtained that learning? That is your assessment. Think about how you're going to assess that objective as you write that objective, so that they should align. Then the third component of that is, once you know what the objective is and how you're going to assess it, then you move into, well, now how am I going to teach it in order to make sure that what students are supposed to learn is what they learned, and I'm going to help them structure the lesson and structure that information in a way that will help them be successful on that assessment, so that they will have mastered that objective. Okay, the next area that we talked about was just a reminder about the achievement gaps and those kinds of things that indicate that we have a lot of work to do in education, not just to break down that achievement gap and the gap between socioeconomically deprived children or high poverty children and those who come from a more affluent environment. There are all kinds of gaps. And then we also know that if you compare the United States, based on the slides that I gave you to look at, that we are, with even the developed nations, we are below average in most cases, particularly with reading and math. And in North Carolina, we're even below the national average in some things. So we in North Carolina have an even greater responsibility to change what we do to make sure that we are teaching, that students are learning. it's not just about teaching. It's about what are the students learning in the process. And that's why I had you look at the developmental stages. Because when you study Piaget, you're talking about the cognitive development of children and when they're ready to learn certain things. You're talking about with Vygotsky, also cognitive development, but also more particularly language development. When are they ready to speak? When do they need speech therapy? When will they be able to profit from speech therapy? When will they be able to stop reversing letters? Those kinds of things. That's what that developmental process is all about. We know that children don't always progress at the same rate through these stages, but they do pass through these stages. So if we're expecting students to be able to do a certain thing, we need to know that they're capable of doing that. Then, of course, with Erickson and Kohlberg, we're looking at the psychosocial and the moral development. And this is where you really get into some of the discipline issues. You know, where are kids in terms of their psychosocial development? Where are they in understanding what's right and wrong and what to do about that? There's a book that I just got from ASCD. It's called All Learning is Social and Emotional. And that kind of leads me into the next topic, which is looking at the multiple intelligences and learning styles. When you were doing your research, you probably on Howard Gardner, and that's Gardner, Gardner, not Gardiner, as you would be the fellow that tends to your vegetable garden, but Gardner, Gardner, Howard Gardner, Theory of Multiple Intelligences. When he began, he had 7 intelligences, and some of you in your posts I saw talked about his 7 intelligences. Then he added another intelligence called the naturalistic intelligence. That came later. That was the 8th intelligence. And then came the last one that he's done so far, is the 9th one, which is existential intelligence. I'm not sure I understand what he means about existential, but his point is that children learn differently, that they have different gifts. It's not just an IQ score that should define what a student is able to do or the way that he's able to express what he has learned. And all of that kind of goes into the 3 sets of the 3 components of learning styles theory. One thing I did want to mention about multiple intelligences, a number of you picked up on that as you were doing your posts, that not everybody agrees with Gardner's theory. And there's not a whole lot of research out there to back him up. I think he is on the right track, but it's kind of something that we're going to have to accept a little bit by faith because the research base is not there. And people kind of pounce on that as an argument why we shouldn't really be paying a whole lot of attention to it. But I think there is merit to what he says, because when we talk about universal design for learning later on, we're going to be talking about how do kids show you what they've learned? How do you make that a part of that assessment that I was talking about earlier? Because if you know that there are kids who don't necessarily perform well on tests, but that can tell you information, then that's a different way of having kids express their learning to you. Maybe they're musically talented and they could do a rap or do a song, or if they are talented in kind of a bodily kinesthetic kind of way, maybe they can make something and do a project and explain that project to you, so that you know that they know the material, but they might not be able to pass just a total written test in that way. We've got to get into the idea of authentic assessment, that we assess kids in ways more than just for their verbal or mathematical intelligence area. So learning styles, and when we met on Monday night, we talked about if anybody had found, as they did that learning styles inventory, that they really panned out differently than they had thought they would. And several people said that they had. Then we sort of did a poll to see how many people were visual learners, primarily, and how many people were auditory learners primarily, and how many people were bodily kinesthetic learners primarily. And in that group that was there, we had about 22 people there Monday night. Most of them were either visual or auditory, and fewer were bodily kinesthetic. I have had groups where they were extremely bodily kinesthetic. All right, then we got into the brain-based learning issue. And we talked a little bit about that article. You had to write your 10 learnings that you gained from that article. And we talked about what some of those things were. So then I kind of reviewed what the assignment is for next week, or actually for this week. I'm asking you to read a peer-reviewed article on brain-based learning, summarize the findings of the article, and then once you do that summary, what does it mean to you? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Are there parts of it you agree with? Are there parts of it that you disagree with? And then you do this as a forum. So you just post this to the forum and make sure you cite your references in APA format. Once again, since this is a forum, you do not have to do the title page. Make sure that, once again here, you do not have to respond to the postings of 3 other people either. And this should be probably, about a page or 3/4 of a page. It doesn't have to be a great long thing. But the whole point here is to get a different perspective on brain-based learning. I've had you to read that article, and you need to be familiar with the concepts in that article. But in this case, I'm asking you to find another article, make sure it's peer-reviewed. If you have questions about that, contact Jackie Hill in the library here. She's the research librarian, and she can help you make sure you get a peer-reviewed article and how to go about finding it. I'm just trying to get you to see that there are some people out there, and you may find a few of these articles that disagree with using brain-based learning in educational classrooms. So, you're going to find different kinds. Some people are very pro brain-based learning, and there are a few detractors or a few anti-brain-based learning folks out there. All right. Then that's that first assignment, and that's a forum. I have given you the changingminds.org link, and that's where it is. When you come down to the bottom of that, go to theories, and under motivation, you find the different theories. And you will be assigned, or you are already assigned, one of these theories. And you're going to need to do a little more research than that little statement that is kind of posted here beside each of the theories here. You need to look them up and do a little research and write probably about a half-page summary of that theory. Let's go back here. And I have assigned you already the article that you need to read and respond to. And this is, once again, a forum posting, and it does not require you to respond to 3 other folks. So this is the link that you use, and this is where you would do your posting for that assignment. And those were the things that we talked about. When we get into the following week, we'll be looking at those on Monday night. Okay? Hope this helps. If you were not here, you can certainly just take a few notes on the things that I talked about. And I apologize that you don't have the benefit of the discussion that we had. We had some really good discussion. One of the things I pointed out to them is that when they are in class, they need to be participating in any discussions that we do. So with that, I'm going to end this video, and thank you very much.